Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start reading, I just want to give a thank you to Clara Kim, to Rebecca Laurie, and to Justin Leroy, who has been really the linchpin in pulling us all together, and I'm so pleased to be in conversation with you all. So I'll do some brief introductions, and then we'll jump right into a conversation. I'm really interested in hearing you all speak about your work as artists, your work in Leimert Park, your collaborative history, and Black institutionality, what that might look like in your framework. So I'll start with Dale Brockman Davis. He's an artist, teacher, community arts activist, and curator, co-founder with his brother, Alonzo Brockman Davis, of the Brockman Gallery, a Leimert Park institution. Davis creates multimedia artworks that centers upon the use of color, texture, and form to capture histories of the past. Davis has shown his work in numerous exhibitions, galleries, and contemporary art forms, including the Hammer Museum, Roberts and Tilton Gallery, the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art, the Watts Towers Art Center, and the California African American Museum. In 1997, Davis received acknowledgement for his cultural contributions to the community by the California State Senate. More recently, he was awarded for outstanding cultural contributions by two Los Angeles city officials, Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa in 2009 and Council Member Bernard Parks in 2012. Essence Harden is a curator for Freeze LA, Focus 2024, and a visual arts curator and program manager at the California African American Museum. Essence has curated exhibitions at the Orange County Museum of Art, Art and Practice, Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, Museum of African American Diaspora, MOAD, Human Resources, and Oakland Museum of California, amongst others. Essence is a contributor to the New York Times Magazine, the Los Angeles Times Magazine, Image. Essence, I've never said that out loud. Is that two S's and sense?
Yeah, that's right.
Art 21.
It's a long bio.
Art 21, Contemporary Art Review, Carla, Review Los Angeles, Artsy, Lala, Cultured Magazine, Performa Magazine, SFAQ, International Arts and Culture, and has written catalog entries for California Biennial, Pacific Gold, Made in LA, Acts of Living, Prospect 5, Yesterday We Said Tomorrow, Brave New Worlds, Exploration of Space, Palm Springs Art Museum, and What Needs to Be Said, Haley Ford Fellows Exhibition. Essence has also served as an art consultant for film and television. Essence is a 2018 recipient of the Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant and a 2020 Annenberg Innovation Lab Civic Media Fellow. Essence graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor's of Art in History and received their Master's of Arts from the Department of African American Studies at UC Berkeley. Essence is a PhD candidate, ABD, in African Diasporic Studies at UC Berkeley. And Ben Caldwell is a Los Angeles-based arts educator and independent filmmaker. A native of New Mexico, Caldwell studied filmmaking at UCLA at the same time as Charles Burnett, Julie Dash, and Billy Woodbury, as part of a group of young artists who were to change African-American independent filmmaking, a cultural phenomenon sometimes called the LA Rebellion. Caldwell's work has been shown nationally and internationally, most recently at LAMAG and at Tate Modern. Caldwell taught 15 years at Cal Arts and was a major founding force in CAP Community Arts Partnerships. Caldwell later founded the KAOS Network Community Arts Center in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. KAOS Network was designed to empower the youth of the community and is the only organization of its kind in South Central Los Angeles where inner city youths can participate in hands-on courses in video production, animation, website development, video teleconferencing, movie production, and the use of the internet. Thank you all very much for being here. It is a pleasure to be in conversation with you. So I wanted to start, and I will ask and invite you to speak as you'd like, to pass when you don't have anything you'd like to contribute, so we can go around and I'll take your silence as a cue to move on. I wanted to ask with how each of your art practice developed alongside of the work you were doing, maybe as a young person in college or elsewhere, and how that kind of thinking started to shape your contributions to your current framework, your current cultural production. I want to also say that we have a kind of multi-generational conversation going on. I really would like to keep this timeline expansive so that we're not always talking in the past, not always talking in the future or the present, but we can kind of move as we need to between time moments. So I'll start there with asking a little bit about how each of your art practices developed.
Okay. Happy to talk. How did it develop? I mean, so I'm a curator right at CAAM, and my relationship, I'm from Oakland, California, and I went to UC Berkeley. And when I was there in undergrad and then in graduate school, I started really thinking about LA as a place where a particular type of Black studies has happened when it comes to art making and Black visual culture. And I became really obsessed with Studio Z, and my dissertation essentially was about that. And so moving to LA, which is 9 years ago this year, I was originally doing dissertation research. And then I stopped doing that pretty quickly and started writing about art and going to art exhibitions and kind of, enveloping myself in what was happening here. And I think what made me so invested in Studio Z and what I saw what was happening, 9 years ago and is happening still, and this kind of trajectory through Los Angeles is this really deep friendship network where artists are working as teachers, they're working as mentors, formally and informally, and they're working together to build and to sustain themselves. And so looking at Brockman Gallery, which is, monumental, and doing that, looking at KAOS Network, having this understanding of the LA Rebellion and UCLA, I just kept seeing that the kind of reverberations of that and the community that was still here, that was producing work now, and that, generationally, this thread was really present. And so my shift even from academic research to curating and writing about art in these different contexts have been guided, and I think this is kind of overall a Black studies thing, right? This between genre, community-based work is paramount to what you do. And so curatorially, that's my framework, right? That's what I care about. It's how I understand the layout of exhibitions. It's how I understand my own efforts and being in conversation with folks constantly, if it's about, artists who I want to work with, artists who I've never heard of, if it's just building out an exhibition theme, or how I, do endless kind of research to build exhibitions, it all feels related to this kind of original concept of what is the network between people that sustains people, and then I can make my own kind of efforts within that. And so I think that's how it's kind of worked for me from academia to what I do now. And then shout out to Naima, who's here, because Naima is the person who gave me my first exhibition at a museum, and it changed my life, so I'm really grateful. And that really showed me again, I was like, oh, there's this community of people here who are willing and able to extend themselves and trust, and it's paramount.
Let's see, I started mine when I was a kid. I was really, let's say, my first drawing was of a horse. I'm from New Mexico, so we drew natural things, and I won a blue ribbon. And from then on, I thought I was an artist, so much so that I had strong enamorations for this, my Spanish teacher. And I was, fifth grader? And I drew her because I had been reading books, and I drew her without clothes. And it was my first ass whipping. So the principal took me in and said, "Why did you draw us?" I said, "Because I'm an artist." So yeah, and my other part, the other portion of my life was interesting that my grandfather was a projectionist, so I was raised in that part of a theater where I watched from the projection room as a young child. And then, let's say, fast forward to being in the Army. Since I saw those movies from that vantage point, then getting drafted and dropped into the Army as an artist, it was the first time that I thought that I could do a better, or at least a more real replication of what I was seeing in front of me as war than the wars that I saw in the movies. And so it made me grab a camera for the first time, especially when I was on R&R. I first went with still cameras that the Brownie type, and then I bought a Yashica that I still have, that I bought in Japan almost 50 plus years ago. So then fast forward to me then get accepted to UCLA. Then when I met a wonderful person by the name of Larry Clark, he introduced me to all of these guys that have been my friends ever since. The Brockman brothers, I got to meet first Alonzo and then Dale, and David Hammonds, and John Otterbridge, Noel Purefoy, Justin Powell, all of those guys in 1 week. Betty Saar. All these wonderful artists made me stay here. And I've been wallowing in the beauty that they've left ever since.
Very interesting to hear your background from that early stage, not knowing where it would end, excuse me, but knowing that we had knowing that, how about now?
That's on. Let's say test. You have to maybe hold it a little.
Okay, how about now? So then to fast forward, this history that you had no idea about, to when I met you, part of the first step into the history of Brockman Gallery. You were part of the group, the initial group that said, to Alonzo, there's a place for rent across the street. You need to check it out, right? And I'm the younger of the two of us, and so I'm getting this kind of like secondhand, not a problem. And then I realized, oh, wait, who's this Ben Caldwell guy? He knows a whole lot, and he's an interesting brother. Let me listen first before speaking, which is, I think, a good opening kind of stance to take. And from the time we really interacted, it's been one magnificent opportunity to meet and to grow together. If there are questions related to it, we can open it up, or we can talk amongst ourselves some more. But I don't want to hold the microphone too long, because I'm sure we're going to generate some powerful questions. Joyce.
I want to continue in that frame, in that line of thinking, and also kind of go back to this moment of when you came back to Leimert Park, or to think about developing, using Leimert Park as a place for Brockman Gallery. What was Leimert Park like at the time? And I would also open that question up to Essence as well, as you've been curating at Art and Practice, coming into Leimert Park and learning that community as well, how you understand Leimert as a cultural hub.
Well, let me open it up by saying we opened Brockman in 1967. And there was nothing like it in the community. There was nothing like it on the block. It was all virgin everything. We were artists, students who knew a lot of other artists. And we were involved in Watchtowers type programs. where we, once again, we can refer back to all of these magnificent artists that we have been privy to and been cousins to, parts of for a lifetime. And, as you grow into it, you realize there is some magnificence to it. But you don't, in the process, you don't have time to count. There's no time to count because it's your life. And so, the opportunities continue to open and weave, and the stories that are built. No art galleries in the community. The idea was that we would seek out older mentors raised by older parents. And so initially it was the strength of Bill Paggio and Charlie White, who sat on the steps of Brockman and issued challenges to us that we were unfamiliar with in terms of just business. What do you do? Can we see your books? Things like that were extremely challenging for us who had never had no business sense like that. But, turn around and then you meet somebody like Ruth Waddy, who's got a cultural basis and world basis that you didn't know, but you had sense enough to be quiet and listen. And so I'd like to add that to the conversation, because none of this is done in a void, none of it is done alone, and credit has to be given. It's a big piece.
I think Ruth and Gladys Waddy.
Mike?
Yeah, Ruth and Gladys Waddy. Yeah, it made me go back a little more. But yeah, Gladys is how I met John Otterbridge, and Charles Dixon. She had Friday dinners at her house where she was forcing us as artists to meet each other and talk with each other over food, some good Southern food cooking, and so she would bring all the folks over, and we would go and talk through life and see how we could intersect and grow. That's the thing that was phenomenal for me as an artist from New Mexico and Phoenix. I was the only person that was of this color at that school. And so it was quite unique to be in Phoenix and, in New Mexico, and then to come to this place where, to me, there were so many phenomenal artists, like the ones that I just named, who were just phenomenal. So I just felt that I fell into heaven in a lot of ways, because I kept asking, where are the black artists? And I fell into these groups of folks. And the thing to me that's unique about the template that I think should be emulated for the future for here is that they had a group called The Gathering. The Gathering was a collective of folks that also included Horace Tapscott and actors, theater people. It was all, and it had a co-op food place, so on a Saturday like this, they were out there giving away foods like people are doing now, except that it was not that same kind of struggle. It was about the struggle of us collectively working together with some of those 7 principles, of really believing in those things. And the undergirding portion of this that was interesting to me was the Gnosticism classes that took place also on Saturday with the Aquarian bookstore. So you could do a deep dive into African cultural history that people aren't even doing now, which is really pretty phenomenal. And out of those things grew a lot of the movements. Out of that kind of cultural cosmology that they had for the Gnostic classes grew the Kwanzaa, grew the Black Panthers, grew US organization, grew all of these types of things. So that's what I just left, and I was a little late for it because we were hammering that out in our studio, because we're wanting to collectively get people together. And I'm using my shuttle system that we're supposed to create for this neighborhood by 2028. We're going to use We're going to use the car and transportation to go to all the hot points, all the places where people aren't getting along. We want to drive you from point A to point B because everybody can drive. We can drive anybody to point A to point B. And that way we can cause the communications between those hot points that don't get along.
Leimert, oh, I forgot the question.
Excuse me.
I know, Leimert.
As you've been curating shows at Art and Practice through your collaboration with CAAM, how did you understand Leimert Park, and how do you understand it now that you have been developing exhibitions for that neighborhood?
Yeah, okay, thank you. How do I understand Leimert? I live there, so in part, that's been really vital, right? Because I have a kid and I walk around, I do lots of stuff in the neighborhood, and I live there. And so part of curating, it's been really exciting to have, for instance, Justin Leroy, who works here now at MoCA, his first 3-channel film be presented at Art and Practice. And so it was really amazing, and Justin's from South Central. So it was really amazing seeing everyone come out for this person who's from here, who has work in this space, because oftentimes institutions, right, you know, can feel really alien from the communities in which they are located. Mark Bradford is also, you know, from Leimert, and that's important and vital, and did hair next door, right, until his like 20s. So there's these kind of connections, but in part how I've been curating, when I've been able to curate the space at Art and Practice, this negotiation between having exhibitions that locate artists who are from Los Angeles in Art and Practice. That show happened coinciding with Thaddeus Mosley, and that was curated by Jessica Bell Brown, and then I think Taylor Renee had an exhibition up also in like the Window Gallery. So just kind of thinking about how that space can move and bend. The people who are shown there help the people who live in Leimert, who hang in Leimert, to feel invested in walking through the doors, right? And CAAM has a very different audience than Art and Practice, and so it's been really interesting to see CAAM folks come down, you know, the 2 miles, because CAAM's an exposition park, to Art and Practice, and be like, oh, this is another space where Black cultural things are happening, Art and Practice specifically. So I think it's been encouraging, it's been interesting. You know, I think there's an incredible amount of work to always do, and I'm happy to be a person who gets to participate in building out that audience and building out the exhibitions that happen there. And so that exhibition with Justin was just, I was like, oh, this is fascinating that this is the most people I've seen come to an opening, people who are just kicking it, walking through the doors, because of the crowd of people, what it looks like on the outside, and the inside makes you want to go in. And that's really important too, right? If you don't see anybody who looks like you walking through the doors, you're not going to probably walk in yourself. And so Art and Practice has this kind of relationship where it gets to be built, and that collaboration with CAAM, I think, is really important to building, sustaining, and changing, you know, what's shown there and who's there. And yeah, I don't know. I find it really exciting, right? And I like that I can walk there from my house, which I never thought I'd be able to do in LA, like walk to work. But I get to do that a lot when I'm there, and it's helpful to talk about the art that's happening there on the way, right? Like on Degnan, because people are friendly, people talk to you, and I'm friendly and I'll talk to people. And so that feels really generative too.
Thank you. Ben, I wanted to ask you a little bit about KAOS and its role, continued role in Leimert. And you just mentioned a little bit around this shuttle that you're developing, but to speak to that, I think I read that you refer to it as a living resource, to kind of speak to this relationship between art and life and creative skill building, and then I'll open it up to you all as well.
Yeah, well, the thing that I did first out of the groundation that I learned with Brockman, and once I taught at Howard for 3 years, and then I came back, out of touring with my film and asking questions, and thought I would set up a place that dealt with media in all the ways that it showed itself, but I was going to do it as if I didn't know what the answer was. And that meant an incubator to me. So I ended up thinking of my place as a petri dish for the arts. So to drop things in, see how they germinate, see how well they work with the environment that's there. Because the one thing I learned at Howard was that Jim Crow really is a kind of, it's a gnawing effect on our community, and that I thought that someone needs to take the time to kind of do, I called it militarily. It was like going through and putting buttons saying that this is a landmine, and this is a landmine, and this is a landmine, to start stepping into these Jim Crow landmines that happen in our community. And once I took that perspective, it was extremely helpful, because you could go to a meeting and watch the explosion and then study it, as opposed to letting it stick on you like that, the story of the tar baby. Once you touch it, it totally wraps you up in it. And so I thought that that would be the perspective that I started taking, and then wrote a grant around our specific problem, which was the 11 to 25-year-olds. So I wrote a grant. I had to prove it for 1 year. I rented a camera and showed the powers that be that video is an art form, because at the time they didn't think it was an art form. And so I showed them how we were using it, and I used Shirley Clark's method, which is, I don't know if you guys know her, she's a phenomenal experimental artist that dealt with video as if it was an art form similar to dance. And so I used her methodology to show the proof that a group of kids that don't see themselves then could see themselves on the medium, and we use that as a way, like a dancer, the fourth wall. You could see yourself instantly, and there was a self-corrective thing that happens with that I really played off, and it was really phenomenal. So we wrote the grant. I got it for 4 years, and it helped set the stability for me to be able to at least say that I could work 4 more years with a business. And I launched it with right after the Olympics, and it was Ulysses and I with the Electronic Cafe helped
Ulysses
me.
Jenkins?
Huh? Ulysses Jenkins, yeah. We were able to, he pulled my code on Electronic Cafe, and it changed my life, because we were doing Zooming in 1984, where we were interconnecting 5 disparate communities, and that helped sail me forward for the rest of the times, because I just kept pitching that idea until it caught up with us, and then I switched up and started doing AI and VR and those things. I find that the real thing that, in order to stay strong within this colonized system that we're living in, that you have to stay ahead of the curve, or otherwise the colonized system will run over you. So that's the methodology that I've been using the whole while, is I say 30 years to 50 years in advance, and then watch the world catch up, and then we can help our people, help not only our people, but just help humans in general understand each other by the proper use of this medium. So that's the way I see filmmaking, as a healing instrument, not just an entertainment instrument.
Dale, I'll ask you, it seems kind of baked into Brockman, multidisciplinary, before we were using that phrase necessarily, experimental. I wonder if you could think a little bit about that importance to you in your own practice, and how you formed community.
because we started so young, so early,
Have you bring the mic up?
it was living the life of the experiment, just as a concept to hold on to and think about. So 1967, there was nothing like it, and we felt like we have an opportunity, we're going to try it. And Ben was around, he was knocking on the door, giving us ideas that he had brought when he was, at UCLA. And but you started, and then you're like, you have to, the commitment is to keep up with it. So as a beginning, it was like, well, we have an opportunity here to show works by minority artists, as many as we can find. And so it was like, shake the rug, see who's there. We found out a lot of people, for the sake of the analogy, a lot of people in the rug. So we were, then you get into the stereotypes. Real easy for people to go, well, they only cater to African American artists. Well, we weren't going for that either, because when you shook out who was looking for an opportunity, it was everybody. So we had opportunities, and it took me a while to really understand the significance of having had Korean artists one cultural show as a grouping. Now I look at it and it's like, because we are so impacted by all of the communities, it was like, had its own phenomenal effect. As we continued to kind of like fight the prejudice that we were only there for African American artists, then it drew criticism by elements of the Black community that wanted us to acquiesce to their standard for us. It's like you create a business and somebody goes, oh, there's an opportunity. I want to be a part of this, but you know what? In order for you to get my attention, you have to fulfill my need. So there were issues with, if we didn't have Black imagery, then we were failing at our task. Well, now it's time to fight, because it was so much more than that. It was about understanding the need for the underserved, women in general. Like, pick your group. So, we grew fast. We also learned that if you're going to have a business establishment, that you have to make a way for your artists to make money. So we committed real early in the game. It's like, you go through all the motions. Print materials, we don't have it now, but print materials are extremely costly. Mailings, extremely costly. What you would have to go through with the post office would be so phenomenally struggle-based that it was like, you didn't want to ever do it again. Ever. We need them still. And they are part of a class of people who are in the same class as just regular folk. They're making things happen for all of us, but kind of like underrepresented, underserved, underappreciated, really. So the learning curve was pretty wild, and so we decided that the least we can do is this was like a gift from the Magi's. You don't know you're doing it, you don't really understand what the gift is, but we decided, you know what? Every show we have, we will purchase work by those artists. We respect you enough that we will purchase works ourselves, right? And so it became, gifts. They became gifts. So we purchased work, gave it to my mom, gave it to our favorite aunt who helped raise us. My dad, we'd send work to high Bill, Maryland, you know. And over time, we realized, you know what? When they passed, all of that collected work came back to us. Now we're in a position of saying, wait a minute now, we've got a collection here that's phenomenal. Now now the game has changed. Now you're like an older, wiser person who's made these early moves in life that you thought were like, okay, well, this is what I kind of like need to do. And now it's like there are things in the collection that states want. Because I've gotten older, wiser, comes with age. I'm 78 years old. You know, if you're paying attention, damn it, you didn't pay attention for no reason at all. So now you're in a position where you can really figure out the true value of works. Little things that were like, oh, you know, oh yeah, here's a little Betty Saar. What's little about Betty Saar? Nothing. It's nothing to do with size. It's to do with brain power. It has to do with who she is as a woman in the art world. And so, you know, all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's a power base here that we need to rethink, reuse, gift. So that's where our position, Alonzo and myself, are now. Something we never could have predicted, but quite interesting to be a part of now.
I'm mindful of the time, so I do want to ask of each of you, if you have questions for each other that you'd like to present to each other, and then we'll open it up for questions as well.
I would like to just say, I would like to hear questions from the audience. I mean, they're here, you're here. We honor you for coming and being a part of this very special time. And so, if you don't,
That's fine. I have Ben's contact. I have your contact.
Here.
Talk to us. Ask us.
I am going to open it up, but I feel like you have a question that.
No, I always have questions. Don't worry.
Okay, we can weave ourselves back into it, so we'll open it up for questions. I think a mic is coming to you.
What's up, y'all? Thank y'all so much for taking the time, all of y'all, for real. I said it when I walked into Essence. This is a very iconic lineup, and I'm grateful and honored to even be able to hear y'all experiences and what y'all doing. And I really just wanted to say a huge, huge thank you to all your efforts, respectively, in your own times and your own spaces and what you're doing. It's, for me, been felt, you know, I'm not from LA. I was born in Lancaster, raised in the IE, but then I moved to LA 2010, and the first place I ended up was KAOS Network. Quite literally, all my friends were there all the time. And like, I'm at Bananas every night. Every Tuesday night, and I'm on the corner with the homies who are all from Leimert and from different parts of South Central. And so those are the folks that I'll say raised me here in LA, right? And so became to appreciate all these things, working with folks at Crenshaw, and they're talking about y'all, right? Like these, your names I'm hearing all the time in the community, and then now I live there, and so it's a huge thank you. And like, to go from being at KAOS and hanging out and doing the thing, and then to learning who you were, Ben, specifically Mr. Caldwell, and like what your work was, and like being inspired, and then going through the whole LA Rebellion rabbit hole, and then that was a whole thing at Art and Practice too, and you're like, Full Circle is crazy. And then, to even Juneteenth 2 years ago, you had that beautiful panel with Charles and I think Aaliyah was there, and everybody was chatting about these things. And then Creative Commons is in the building and what they're doing too. And so it's just like, you've just been a hub for so many things that have touched my life just in the last 14 years. And so in 14 years, you've touched me 3, 4, 5 different ways. So it's just a huge thank you for all of that.
Thank you. Thank you. That wasn't a question.
Ben Caldwell,
Yeah.
didn't you say that either Ice-T or Ice Cube came through?
Yeah, I've worked with both of those guys.
Any lessons?
I think that the real lesson for me is that kind of like what Dale is saying is like you don't realize what power our culture has until retrospect. Because I remember seeing Elizabeth Catlett fist there all the time, and it was just there as a piece of art object in Brockman, but it was Elizabeth Catlett, you know what I'm saying? So it's that kind of stuff that we kind of take for granted, along with the thing that I was thinking also is that our neighborhood has generated almost 5 to 6 MacArthur Grant recipients, so that's more recently Mark, right? And then I worked with several of them, Mark, Kerry Marshall, Kerry Weems, Mark, David Hammonds, Charles Burnett. All of them have gotten, and they're all within this neighborhood, and they've all been designated as geniuses, which I think is quite unique for one little 2-square block area to create that many geniuses in one space. So I always felt really that it isn't just my dream, but it's a reality that all of these guys are really quite powerful, and so I think also for what you were saying with bananas, I love bananas. It helped me go into the 30 or something because it made me understand that generation a lot better because of the gender and all the various issues that they were dealing with. It was quite fun. I really also like this latest group that I'm working with, which I'll announce they're doing something Monday. It's called the Juice Joint. And they're really quite powerful too. I think it's the Crockpot Juice Joint, and it's a good youth movement too. I just thought I'd say something in between.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your time today. The question I have is kind of has multi-layers, but I just wanted to get your take on it. How do we as a community do a better job of educating the value of what art is? When I say that, like I've been to different art shows in different communities. I'm from the East Coast, so I've been to like the Met and in different spaces where a piece of art on the wall, maybe it's $10,000, but it seems in our community we can't equate the value of how much we'd spend on something long term versus maybe getting a print or getting a shirt or saying we were there. Like how do we, I guess I'm trying to say like how do we appreciate the people before us value-wise, and then how do we appreciate the people now for what they're putting out to let them continue to make the work, because making the work is not free.
Oof, you're looking at me? I was really thinking about that. I think that's a really beautiful question. I mean, it's obviously, I guess it's layered and it's geographical, it's so many things. I said earlier I have a kid and she's 3 and I take her, how I able to go to openings half the time is I just take her with me. So she feels very comfortable basically in any space. And I'm like, yeah, you can't touch stuff, but you also don't have to be super quiet. You don't have to do that, whatever. So essentially she's growing up very differently than I did, where she feels like art is every aspect of her life. Like it's not separate from what she does. And because all of my friends are artists and, you know, like my spouse is an artist, like it's what her life is. And so there's this kind of, and our house is filled with it, there's no separation for her. She's 3. For people who are older, right, like teenagers and folks in their 20s and stuff like that, and this idea around like collecting, which is really big now, folks want to like, you know, buy work and how do you enter it? It's often just, I think, even having respect and regard for people who make work. Like at the baseline, if the idea is just to get something from someone and to not participate in an exchange of energy and of compassion and of grace, then I don't know how else to begin a conversation. When I think of curating something, I'm not like, I want this artist, I know exactly what I want them to do and make this, and it's gonna add this value to my life. I'm like, this person is making work, I wanna start a conversation with them. And sometimes it takes years, it takes months, but I think of it as an interlaced relationship forever, where I'm like, the second I meet you and we start talking, that's until I'm no longer on the planet. And I will always help. I will always, you know, answer my phone, answer the text, and think about how we can continue to grow together. Because to me, that's the root of it, right? Like that's the step around an exchange of energy and seeing that we're all tied. And so part of how do you get people to have regard for it is really around that kind of question to me, which is you have to see value in people and value in what they do, not necessarily monetarily initially, but just the idea that what they're doing is important and that you can belong to that too, right? You can belong to that project. And when you do that, then you can start being like, oh, when I have, I don't know, $100 to spend on something, where do I want it to go, right? Like I think about how Reparations Club is a Black-owned bookstore. It's in West Adams, right? It's like on Jefferson and Crenshaw, basically. And I'm like, I could buy a book from Amazon. I could buy a book from, I don't know, some other giant space, or I could go to Rep Club and buy a book there. And once I'm there, I'm like, oh, there's also prints for sale and little cards for sale and all these other makers that the store itself was able to hold. And so when you start entering spaces like that of being like, with my funds, how can I best give it to a space that's giving it to a space, giving it to all these individual people making work, how can I belong, right, to this exchange of energy? I think that is how I think you start to build a conversation in your head where you have value for people who are making work, which may cost $20, $30, $500,000. Like, it's gotta start somewhere, and I think that's kind of how I navigate this space. I think of not everything I do, but a lot of the things I do, I really try to use my money in relationship to it being like the community, because I don't, believe that the money's inherently mine and it's like more worthy of me than someone else. It's how do I want to participate in that exchange, and that's how art has come to me and how it matters to me. So that's my answer for that. It's kind of every which way, but that's how my brain works.
I may be paraphrasing a little bit and may not have all the words right, but I heard Ben saying something about working ahead of the curve. You had mentioned Jim Crow, and you had talked about colonialism, and then you said we have to work ahead of the curve. And I was hoping that you would talk a little bit more about that.
Part of working ahead of the curve is to work with the youth. And so that's why I target working with the young people, because it's like Khalil Gibran says, that their eyes see things that you don't even know because they're going to live in the future that you're not going to be there. So I started working with that almost instantly because I saw it in war, because the youth have a vision beyond what is happening at that moment, and you could see it in their eyes. I can also see it in the eyes of the youth that are in this war zone. So I think that's where I get my solace, is seeing that there is a clean space, a clean slate that you can create on, and think of what if, how could this happen with this or that as a clean slate, and acknowledge the problems, but come up with an answer for them before it hits you in the face. So that's kind of how I see looking ahead of the curve, and so I created. Also, I think Essence was mentioning Mark Bradford and his work. Part of what I liked about what Mark wanted to do and is doing is he knew that he had a brand, that the world was going to drop busloads of folks into our neighborhood. So he was saying, Ben, get ready, because these folks will be popping in and they love discovering things. So play on that discovery. So all of us, in thinking ahead, we can be ready for those folks that come busloads out. And then, so I'm building our template out of that, waiting for the lines to come that'll be outside my building that I can then draw into our space in a way that we can create a sustainable community for our people here, because they're sitting on $1 billion creative industry that we haven't been able to change into manageable money for our culture. It's, to me, similar to what's happening in Congo and other places. We create all of these, we have all this natural minerals, natural creativity, but we haven't figured out how to make them into objects that the world will buy, and we need somebody else as an intermediary to make it viable as up to now. We're going to change that, right? So that's what I'm in there doing, is trying to look ahead of the curve, set up businesses. For instance, when I jumped and wrote the grant for 11 to 25-year-olds, I was sniffing around ethnographically on looking at our music, and each generation, our kids create phenomenal new music. And so I thought it would be hip if I got ahead of the curve, which I was able to. I got those names that you were naming, like I worked with Easy and Eazy-E and Label McCarr, who did Lion King, George the Jacksons, who did my song, Jackson, what is it, the Brothers Johnson, who did the song I Fresh. I took that to Propaganda Records. They refused them all. And it had Lion King on it, it had Eazy-E on it, but they went back to Eazy and said, do all those negative language things that you did, as opposed to me telling them to do something like Motown, along with their negative, but to talk about your beautiful girlfriend that you have, because I knew him as a next-door neighbor with my girlfriend at the time. And so I was like, you have a nice girlfriend, so why don't you write about that instead of putting a bullet to a girl's head and kicking her out of the car? I mean, I don't know where that came from. It's like 14-year-old, So it's that kind of stuff as guidance. And I wish I had stayed there with him, because I just set out when I should have listened, because he also had fuck the police on that same brain that he was in. And I think if I had stayed there with them, as I did with the next generation that came, I was able to work through our psychosocial trauma.
I think this will be our last question.
This has been phenomenal. Thank you all so much. To piggyback off of that, Mr. Caldwell, I wanted to direct this to Dale and Kristin. When talking about expansiveness, right, having an imagination, how, Dale in the past and Kristin presently, how would you invite an artist of color to feel comfortable making whatever creative art came to them, as opposed to just having to make black art or whatever the case may be, right? We're talking about like Sam Gilliam, who was like, I want to make abstract things. Me being black and the artist should be enough for it to be black art. How important is it to give research context to show what continuum people are coming into for that? But then personally, from a gallery standpoint, how do you encourage an artist to take those types of like risks to just do what's coming through them as opposed to what's expected of them, and how powerful that is?
I think my immediate response to it is based on the fact that I was a high school teacher. So my life experience has been about educating the youth and giving them an opportunity to see what's possible, not to allow my personal prejudices to get in the way of their future opportunities. So basically it's like throw the gauntlet down and say, what are you going to do, and how are you going to make it so good that somebody else is going to want to pay attention to it? So you have to have strength of character, and you have to have longevity on your side. If you get caught up in, and this was one of my own personal issues, if you get caught up in having to pay too much rent, oh, somebody went, oh. Okay, so that, that's the right nail. That's the right nail to look at. Then you're stuck right there. Because if your lifestyle is based on your ability to like maintain just the rent, to give you the opportunity to express what's in you, you've got real issues to think about. So if it means there was an artist named George Clack, worked in a very small space. He had a lot of kids. He worked, in his washroom, right? But he also produced some of the really most magnificent serigraph, they were so-called, cards, greeting cards. No, they weren't greeting cards. The label greeting cards would be somebody else's manufactured perception of what the end product was. It was artwork. And so we had to convince George, who was a very humble guy, that what he produced was artwork. Sell it as artwork, right? Now, the value changes according to, what someone would pay for something. But the importance of introducing that small child, no matter what the age, is the gift that you can give from the very beginning that will change them forever. And so they can run with it, or they can stagnate, be right there with it. It's your opportunity, your challenge to guide the youth. And we're all, I think, in tandem in belief that it's part of our duty as the older generation, although there's some differences in age group, right? But we have the same goal, and the goal is to provide opportunities for the youth. I think that's the focus that we must have.
I'll just say, I work in an archive, and part of what I see my role being there is to, one, have opportunities to preserve legacies so that they can be found. That's a kind of long-term work. Essence was speaking about this also in terms of developing relationship with artists over years, but it goes into also really fundamental ideas around archiving and the archiving practice, so that when somebody is cataloging an archive, that they are knowledgeable about who the people are, who they are, so they can be named in a finding aid, so they can be found later by a young researcher, a young artist. And so for me, what I see my role in being is to constantly push that the needle back in time so that we are not thinking the first person to do this, the first Black person to do this, that we can see a lineage that goes much farther than what an art history book has kind of bracketed off as African American art history. So you see long histories of experimentation, long histories of abstraction, long history of collaboration that goes beyond that encompasses and is expansive of representation and abstraction and everything in between. So I see it as kind of like building out lineage work so that it can be accessible. And I think this is something that you all spoke to so gracefully and elegantly, that there was always a reference today around who you worked with, who you were thinking about, who you were learning from, and that kind of building out lineage every time we have the opportunity to do it, so that someone can write it down and go look it up, go look them up, recognize that we have, really incredible forebearers with us to speak with them, and to get into. This is my plug, to get into archives. So I want to thank you all for being here. It has been such an honor, and I look forward to seeing you all down on Crenshaw tomorrow. No, Monday for MLK Day. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.